Well, you all have wondered for a very long time, so now I'm going to give it to you. Oh boy. Hello everyone, Britton here, also known as Samoki Dude, and I am back with another video. And today I'm going to be doing something that I wrestled with doing for a very long time. I didn't know if I could narrow down all of my favorite fantasy books into a top 10 list, but that's what I'm going to be doing today. These are my top 10 fantasy books slash series that I love absolutely, and I really would want you all to read, and I think is really damn good. So there you go. These are my personal favorites, so, deal with that as you will. And you guys probably know what some of the picks are going to be. I will get into them as we go along. But yeah, this is something I've wrestled with for a long time. I didn't know if I could muster down my favorite fantasy series into a top 10 list. It just feels like, it was a very Herculean task, I thought. But then I saw my friends, John Minton, and, John Minton did it, and Red Fury Books has done it, and I've seen Mike do it, and I've seen a bunch of other people do it. And it is because of their malignant influence that I am now here talking about my top 10 fantasy series slash books of all time. Again, if you've watched my channel enough, you probably will guess some of the ones that will be on here, but yeah, let's just get into it before I ramble on for too long. Before I get into it, a couple of honorable mentions, so I'm just going to list them off real quick. Elric of Meldemonet, Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, some comics, so The Sandman, which requires no introduction, Alan Moore's Saga of the Swamp Thing, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, Hellboy, Horns, Piranesi, The Changeling, which is a really good book by Victor Laval, The Vor, The Camelot Shadow, which is a criminally underappreciated book by my friend Sean Gibson, The Edan Trilogy by Dr. Philip Chase, William Blake's Poetry, Paradise Lost, Something Wicked This Way Comes, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Solomon Kane, Saga, the comic, and The Stand. There's some other ones I could mention, but those are the ones that are on my honorable mentions. You will also not see series such as Malazan, Black Company, Robin Hobb's stuff, Discworld, because I haven't read any of that stuff yet, so I'm sorry if you guys have watched that expecting me to go Malazan. I haven't read them yet. Someday I will. Next year I will start Malazan, so tune in for that whenever that comes around. But yeah, so I guess I should get into my top 10 favorites before I start rambling on for too long. Let's do it. Number 10 is a bit of a old favorite of mine that is not as much appreciated anymore, and that makes me really sad, and that is, of course, J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series. I mean, what can I say about it? It's in a weird, odd limbo at the moment where, on the one hand, it's still very much beloved by a bunch of people, and on the other hand, there are some fantasy fans who seem to be kind of ashamed of it in some weird way. I mean, what can I say? Great characters, great story. I love the setting of Hogwarts. It's such a cozy location. And even as it gets darker, Hogwarts just feels safe. And I love the setting. I like the Britishness of it. It's very much not like how it is in America. It has a very British sensibility, which I really enjoy about it. But it's kind of hard to say too much about Harry Potter because so many other people love it. So many other people have said things far more eloquently than I have. But I love Harry Potter. Go read them. I think they're fantastic. Number 9 is going to be kind of an odd choice, but bear with me, and that is the Robert E. Howard Conan the Barbarian, or Conan the Cimmerian, which is what he was originally called. Why I say this is a bit of an odd choice is because, one, not really novels, they're actually short stories, but if you really want an idea of where a lot of the fantasy tropes came from that wasn't from J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, which will be on this list, it will not be number 1, so just keep that in mind, but it will be on this list. But Conan is really, really good. I remember picking this specific volume up 2 years ago, and I was completely blown away just how good they were. And not even just good, but even better than some modern fantasy that I've read. Robert E. Howard was a unique stylist in the world of fantasy. And despite the fact that he is very beloved in the fantasy genre, and he does get his dues, I do think that he is a bit underrated as a writer. I think he was a genuinely really talented guy, and man, it was really sad. It is really sad what happened to him, and one can only imagine what he could have done had he not done what he did. But a lot of these are more adventure stories than an epic fantasy, so just keep that in mind. But Howard's sense of place, his action sequences, his dialogue, the way his intensity, the feverish intensity of his action sequences have never been bettered, in my opinion. And he is easily the best of the pulp writers, and he is my personal favorite pulp writer. So, yeah, I really love Conan. I do like Solomon Kane. I mentioned Solomon Kane earlier. I like him better as a character, but I think that Conan is the better written stuff that Howard has done. Now, there are some stuff in this that might not age very well nowadays because this was written in the 30s, so keep your expectations. Tweak your expectations accordingly. But Conan really birthed a lot of what we know as fantasy today, and they're also really damn good adventure stories in their own right. So, is there a bite on there? No, it's just creased a little bit. Another one that I will mention, number 8, is the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. This is kind of like Elric for me. I really love how unapologetically itself it is. It is just absolutely batshit insane, and it is completely unapologetic about it. Stephen King is at his most feverish here. He is at his most imaginative here. And really what he creates is a story that is so different from what we are accustomed to in epic fantasy, while still very much telling a traditional epic fantasy story. But it's also kind of a hard sell for a lot of reasons, mainly because the first book is kind of divisive. There's some people who think it's just complete crap. I know that Stephen King has said that it was a book he wrote when he was younger, so tamper your expectations accordingly. It's a really good series, though. Some of the most imaginative, mind-bending, absolutely insane pieces of fantasy I have ever read. I actually want to reread this series at some point because I really binged it in 2017, I think, and it's been a few years since I read it all last. But I think Stephen King is a really great storyteller, and this really comes through in The Gunslinger. And while many people, or not The Gunslinger, The Dark Tower, but a lot of people really don't seem to notice just how good he is at writing epic fantasy. He really gets the genre, even though he doesn't write in it as often as he does, horror and thrillers. But I really love what he does in The Dark Tower. It is very unique, and it is completely its own beast, and I absolutely love it. I think it's a great series. I think you guys should go check it out. So, yeah, Dark Tower. Give it a shot. It's really quite good. Number 7 is the Gentleman Bastards sequence by Scott Lynch. I really enjoyed the first 2 of these books. Lies of Locke Lamora, the one I'm holding right now, is my favorite. I do have reviews of them, which I will link down below. It's one of those cases where the first 2 books are really good, and the third one is kind of a piece of crap. I really don't like that third one all that much. But the first 2 are absolutely very excellent. Scott Lynch really takes the dynamic of Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, gets rid of all the weird, horny bits, and modernizes it and makes it into his own. I absolutely love the characters of Locke Lamora and Jean Tannen. I think they're both just phenomenal. One of the most beautiful friendships I've ever read in anything that isn't Stephen King's It. I really love the relationship between Jean and Locke. I would even dare say it's kind of a platonic love story between these two men. He really one of the things I really like is that Lynch takes the adventurousness of and wit of Fritz Leiber, as well as the kind of daring do of Alexandre Dumas's work. So I heavily recommend this series if you guys are fans of The Count of Monte Cristo or The Three Musketeers, because it's very much told in that style. It's even very Dickensian at points, which is kind of a given. It's a story of a young thief kind of coming into his own, very Oliver Twist-like, which is one of my favorite stories of all time. But Liza Locke-Lamora is one of the most satisfying stories I have ever read in a long time. One of my favorite revenge stories as well. And it really shows you that revenge is actually pretty underrated. I love that Locke and John take revenge on the odious Falconer. I love it. It's beautiful. It's genuinely beautiful. I will not dare spoil how they do it, but please read it. It is a fantastic book. And Red Seas Under Red Skies is a fantastic book as well. A lot of people are kind of lukewarm on it, which kind of blows me away because I think it is just as strong as the first book, even though the first book still has a hold on my heart. It was my favorite read last year. But this has jumped up as one of my favorite fantasy series of all time. I really love the setting. The storytelling is really good. And Scott Lynch's voice as an author is absolutely insane. I mean, I could read some of it, but you can go find it on some of my old reviews that I did for Gentlemen Bastards, and you'll hear it. He has a unique voice. He has great characters, great storytelling, amazing world building. Give this one a shot. It is phenomenal. So, yeah. Indeed. So, yeah, give it a shot. Number 6 is one I do not own, and it is one that is considered by many, including myself, to be the cream of the crop of fantasy literature, and that is, of course, the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now, I know a lot of you people are going to give me some dirty looks and ask what the hell is wrong with me, why is this not on number 1? There are 5 others I like more than this series, or, there are 5 other series, I should say, that I like more than Lord of the Rings. And also, I think that it would be a predictable choice. I really, as much as I love and adore Lord of the Rings, I think it's the pinnacle of fantasy literature. I do think it would be predictable to put it on number 1, and that would just feel disingenuous to me personally. Now, if Lord of the Rings is your favorite series, I mean, I'm not dissing on you if it is your favorite series. I'm just speaking for myself. It would feel disingenuous to me if I personally put this as my number 1, because that would be the predictable choice. But I love Lord of the Rings, though. It's phenomenal. I love Tolkien's style. I really love how he brings his world to life, and just the amount of detail he puts into it. This book really feels like the best of fantasy, like a myth brought back, a new myth that has been discovered, and Tolkien just was lucky enough to write it down for all of us to enjoy. Of course, Lord of the Rings has been commented upon, deconstructed, discussed. Michael Moorcock's Epic Pooh, of course, comes to mind. I do have thoughts on that, but I won't go into it. But I do think that Lord of the Rings is a phenomenal piece of fantasy literature. It is a must-read, in my opinion. You don't have to like Lord of the Rings, but read it and just think about how Tolkien did all the things that he did. All of the effort he put into creating the world of Middle-earth. And the world of Middle-earth it just seems like a fun place to be in. Well, not all of them. I probably wouldn't go to Mordor. But, I love the Shire. I would love to live in the Shire. So, I mean, it's phenomenal. I absolutely love Lord of the Rings. I think it is one of the pinnacle pieces of fantasy literature. And it's one of the greatest that's ever been done. I really can't say enough about this series. It's kind of like Harry Potter. It's one of those series that's been discussed and deconstructed and talked about in far more eloquent ways than I could ever dream of talking about them. But I love Lord of the Rings, and I think everyone should go read it, and it is one of my favorite fantasy series. It's just not my number 1. But yes, Lord of the Rings, check it out. It's phenomenal. some of the best fantasy ever done. Number 5 is one that I avoided for a very long time, and then I just started kicking myself once I finally started to read it, and that is, of course, The First Law by Joe Abercrombie. Again, I might lose some people because I'm putting this above Lord of the Rings, but Joe Abercrombie has a similar gift as Scott Lynch. Scott Lynch, like I said before, really takes the adventurousness of Fritz Leiber and Alexandre Dumas and modernizes it and really makes it his own. Joe Abercrombie does a very similar thing, except with he has a very Robert E. Howard-esque primal intensity to his work. I don't know if I would call I don't know if I would call The First Law a feverish work, but there are times in this story where it felt feverish, like he was just typing it down with all of his energy in the same way that Robert E. Howard did, that where he was tapping into that same primal energy that Robert E. Howard did when he wrote his excellent Conan stories that I mentioned earlier. But what can I say about The First Law that hasn't been said? Great characters, great storytelling, phenomenal thematic discussions about the nature of human beings and if human beings can change. I really like that Abercrombie and I should go back to my other thought. And also, how do we deal with an inherently corrupt world? Which is one I will be talking about some more on number 4, on my number 4 pick. But this was one of those series I avoided for a long time because so many people were like, oh my gosh, this book is so good. Yes, go read it, Britain. And I was like, yeah, whatever. And then I just picked it up one day, and I started reading it. I hate to say it, but I was sucked in immediately. Joe Abercrombie knows how to hold on to you and never let you go. He has a very unique style, much like Scott Lynch, comparing him to Lynch again. But he manages to combine the old with the new, with his own style. I like to call this series the Wire of fantasy literature because it's very much not just a reflection of the fantasy genre, but also a reflection of our world as well, and the inherent brokenness of our world. And The Blade itself is a really good start. I really like the original trilogy. The Last Argument of Kings is my favorite of the 3. I have not read all of the other ones yet, so I have not read The Age of Madness. I have not read the other standalones aside from Best Served Cold, which is pretty good as well, though I had some gripes with it. But I think Joe Abercrombie he is justified as being called one of the best fantasy writers living today. And much like Lynch, he takes an old property and just adds new life to it. And if you're a fan of like Conan or that old like sword and sorcery style, or even like political thrillers, give The First Law a shot. You will not regret it. So yeah, we'll put that down now. Number 4 is one that was very formative for me and one that will probably shock none of you, and that is, of course, A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin, a.k.a. A Game of Thrones. Yes, it is not finished, and I am sad to say it probably will never be finished. But what we did get is one of the most thorough explorations of the epic fantasy genre I have ever seen. Much like much like Joe Abercrombie and Scott Lynch, George R.R. Martin has a unique skill of taking what is old and adding his own new spin onto it. Now, I should note that dark fantasy is not a new thing. I would even say gritty fantasy is not a new thing. I mean, Conan is technically gritty fantasy, as I like to call it, because I generally don't like the term grimdark all that much, but yeah, whatever. But I think A Song of Ice and Fire is an amazing series. I think it's an often misunderstood series because a lot of people tend to, I must quote Bookborn here, learn the wrong lessons from this series. But I'll admit this is on the list. As much as I love it, it's also on the list because it was such a formative experience for me. And when I first read A Song of Ice and Fire, I thought, wow, I didn't know fantasy could do this. I didn't know fantasy could be like this. And I've been in love ever since. I love Westeros. I love George R. R. Martin's characters. He's created some of the most haunted, conflicted, um, ever contradictory characters that you will ever meet in a fantasy series. But he makes it all work, and he uses this epic scale. I would really call this series the Watchmen of epic fantasy, because it's very much commenting on the epic fantasy genre and really offering and really questioning the foundations of that genre in particular. And few people really take the fantasy genre quite as seriously as George R. R. Martin does. And A Game of Thrones is still one of the best book ones I have ever read. One of the greatest twists of all time with the character of Ned Stark and eventually what happens to him. Which, if you don't know, I can't help you at this point. Just go read them. But A Song of Ice and Fire, I love it a lot. It's one of my favorite series of all time. And George R. R. Martin, I think, is a brilliant writer, even if he has not finished the damn thing yet, and we are all still waiting, George, so... yeah, that's probably not going to happen. But that is the world we live in, unfortunately, and that is just kind of how it rolls. So, yeah, A Song of Ice and Fire is my number 4 pick. My number 3 is going to be a bit one that I have talked about before. I've talked about a lot on this channel, so I will not talk about it too much, and that is Marlon James's Dark Star trilogy, of which there are only 2 right now. I have only read the first one, Black Leopard, Red Wolf, which I think is a masterpiece, and I am reading Moon Witch, Spider King at the moment as well, which is also proving to be a very interesting experience. It's very rare that a book completely rewires what I think of the fantasy genre, but Black Leopard Red Wolf is, in my opinion, one of the best fantasy novels of the 21st century. It takes the old quest narrative that we are so accustomed to in epic fantasy, and Marlon James offers this feverish intensity to the world that he creates. The atmosphere is so immersive in this, and I should warn you all, there are plenty trigger warnings in this. Rape, violence, violence against children, violence against anything. Marlon James does not hold back. There are scenes in this book that still stick in my mind even today, and I love the atmosphere and the feelings that this series has given me. Which is often very uncomfortable feelings. Can you tell I really like to challenge myself as a reader? But I think that the Dark Star trilogy is also a really fascinating concept because it's not really a continuing series. The 3 books that will be put out are 3 versions of the same story. So it kind of goes like this. There's a boy that's been kidnapped, and a bunch of people have been gathered together in order to go after this boy, and it goes horribly wrong. And all 3 of these books are 3 different perspectives of why it went so horribly wrong and the personal journeys of the characters in this world. And I also really love that this is just not the typical pseudo-medieval European type of setting. It is very much pulling from very old African oral storytelling traditions. I'm actually thinking about doing a video soon with my friend Soshi Azu talking about how to read this book, because I know a lot of people have bounced off Black Leopard Red Wolf, but if you keep with Black Leopard Red Wolf and Moon Witch Spider King as well, the rewards will definitely be plentiful. Marlon James has quickly just shot up as one of the greatest talents of modern fantasy, and I can't wait to see what he does next. And it is a frustratingly hard time waiting for book 3. Give me an ending. Dark Star Trilogy. Check it out. Great book. Great books, anyway. Oh dear. Second, number 2 is the Bazlag Cycle by China Miéville. Yes, you knew this was coming. China Miéville's Bazlag Cycle, which are 3 standalone novels that take place in the world of Bazlag, which is one of the most unique and well-realized settings I have ever read in a fantasy novel since J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and I do not say that praise lightly. Mieville really goes into some bizarre, interesting directions in the Bazlag trilogy, and it's another one kind of like a Gentleman Bastards, where the first two books are absolutely brilliant. Perdido Street Station, which is my personal favorite of the trilogy, and The Scar, and the Iron Council, which I did not care for as much. I also have done reviews for all three. I will link them down below. You'll get more of my full thoughts on this. Kind of like Black Leopard, Red Wolf, the Dark Star trilogy, there's a feverish intensity to New Crobazon. There's this... I really love how Mieville makes his cities feel alive. The settings feel alive. I really love that we actually get to see things that are barely discussed in fantasy, like what would political activism look like in a fantasy world. You know, workers' rights and stuff like that. I mean, Mieville is a very ardently left-wing writer, and while I do not agree with his politics, I would say his politics are in complete opposition of my own. He does offer a very interesting and unique view into the fantasy genre. A very primal... Well, primal's not the right word. I would say that the Dark Star trilogy is more primal. A intense, ugly, often uncomfortable feeling combining cosmic horror, epic fantasy, and even urban fantasy. I love the city of New Crobazon, even though I would never live there, even if you pointed a gun at me. And I would love to see more from this world, and I hope that Mieville does return to it at some point, because I really love this setting. It is one of my favorite settings in fantasy literature, so not really much else to say on that. I'm going to put that down. And number one, my favorite fantasy novel of all time. You guys know what it is if you watch my channel, and that is American Gods by Neil Gaiman. I know that Neil Gaiman is not everyone's favorite person right now, so I will keep this brief because I've talked a lot about this book. I remember when I first read it. I was a senior in high school. I picked this book up kind of on a whim, and I decided to read it in gym class. And once I started it, it was like something changed in me. I did not know that fantasy could be written in the way that American Gods wrote fantasy. It's not really a fantasy novel as much as it is part magical realism, part slipstream, surrealistic odyssey into America. It is also a discussion of America and how diverse it is. And it's also a discussion on belief and why people believe. And why, even though as we grow and as the myths become nothing more than myths, there will always be people who will believe in things that are bigger than themselves. After all, the gods are waiting. So, that was a lot. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and maybe I'll make one next year, see if my list has changed anytime soon. I don't know if it will, but we'll see. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you guys can't hear my cat in the background. She's being a bit annoying at the moment. But if you guys like this video, go check me out on Twitter. You can also find me on Instagram. You can also find me on Blue Sky. I'm not really on there very often. You can also find me on Goodreads and Letterboxd, where I write reviews that are probably more coherent than the one you just heard right now. You can also find me... I think that's all of my social media, as a matter of fact, but I digress. Like, subscribe, do all that stuff. As my friend John Minton likes to say, it feels good when you click that like, you click that subscribe button, and also comment some of your own favorite fantasy novels. I would love to hear from you guys. And you can even tell me I'm wrong. Feel free. I would love to hear what you guys think, and I really enjoy doing these types of videos, even though it took me a really long time to put this list together because man, it's really hard getting all those favorites together. And I had to leave a couple out that were really sad to leave out, like The Sandman and Something Wicked This Way Comes, and even Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. I love Alice in Wonderland a lot. That was really hard to leave off the list. But alas, that is not the world we live in, and it may change if I do another version of this video in the future. But those are my favorite fantasy series at the moment. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Till next time.